What does make people sick? Is it more of a physical thing? Is it more of an emotional thing? Is it a combo platter? What have you found?
Illness is a messenger from the soul that we need to change. And so what I call it, illness is not so much a failure, it's a solution. When I'm working with someone, I will say, what was going on in your life when the symptoms appeared? People who have never done anything spiritually will say, I know why I have cancer. And I go, if you know why you have cancer, why are we not listening to you as doctors?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Dr. Christine Page on the show with us today. Christine's been a trailblazer in healthcare for more than 45 years, seamlessly integrating allopathic medicine with holistic and energy healing to support her clients. Now, given my passion for blending spirituality with practicality, especially in the realm of healing, you know I'm going to have plenty of questions for her. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Dr. Christine. Christine, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you. Thank you for making time for us today.
It's absolutely my pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Julie.
You bet. You call yourself a mystic physician. What do you mean by that?
Well, I was called that, a mystical physician, because by Norm Shealy, who I very much admired and worked with in the past. And
Yeah.
people often ask me, well, when did you become mystical? When did you become intuitive? And I always have to explain that actually I've always been intuitive. I've never known what it was like not to be. And the question should be, why did I become a physician? Why a doctor? Because I was brought up with healers and mediums and homeopathy in England, as you can hear. And, that was my normal world. But some part of my soul says it's time to be a doctor. And I had challenges, which I can always go into, really being able to protect my sensitivity to be able to become a doctor, because I felt everything and I could see everything. And so I think one of the reasons that I became a physician was to learn to have healthy boundaries. And otherwise I wasn't going to be able to survive, because I fainted all my, teenage years because I was just too sensitive. So that's how I really became the mystic first and then the physician. And I love I practiced for many years and then moved over to homeopathy and counseling and, intuitive counseling, etc. But I really loved being a doctor because I really care about people and I want to understand why they get sick. And I want to really understand how we can talk to the soul to bring healing to them.
All right, that's a lot to unpack. So let's start at the beginning. You could see spirits and feel things as a child. Can you give us some examples of what you experienced as a child?
Well, and I was brought up in my family. My mother's family are Scottish, and my grandmother and great grandmother, who I never knew, were always called as fae, which means in Celtic traditions to be one with the fairies, but also to be the wise women. So I have a very long lineage of wise women back mainly through my Scottish roots. And it would be that all the, my mother used to describe all the leaders, like the religious leaders of the mayors and everything, would come to the kitchen table of my grandmother and ask for intuitive advice. So that has been very strong. I have a very strong female lineage. And however, I was born into my mother's life. And I thought everybody could see energy. I thought everybody was connected. And so even before obviously I could talk, what I knew I was doing was going out the top of my head and going back to what I would now consider my soul family or my star family. And when I was old enough to tell my mother, I'm doing this, she says, well, it sounds as if it's okay, keep doing it, which I really honor her for. I always could see people, and I would almost say I saw them in layers, but really I could see their personas beyond what was being presented to me. And as a child, a very small child, I thought everybody did this. But really, Julie, my idea was this is a crazy world I've entered into because all these characters were talking to me.
Mhm.
So my mother would say to me, say hello to this person. And it was only later I could say, which one, you know?
So you would see their spirits
Oh,
separately
I
from
saw
the
their
human
spirits, their
body?
personas, I saw them as past lives, I saw guides. I mean, all of these beings that were part of this individual. I mean, I couldn't even just describe it as their soul. I mean, I could see, as I say, I might call them past life star beings. They were all there talking to me.
Yeah, like they came in with a gaggle of spirits with them.
Yes, and so, and I thought everybody was doing this, and as I said, I thought this is a one crazy world. And so in my first 10 years, I was extremely shy. That was what my mother would call me. But really it was like, "Let me get out of here. This is just too scary." And then in my, teenage years, I found the most challenging energy was was suffering of someone.
Mm.
And so, even though all these other characters, if I perceived there was one of the subpersonalities was suffering, despite the smile on someone's face, I would take that on and faint. And I think fainting was a really good way of getting away from this. So I went from being shy to fainting. And so that's really the odd question is why on earth did I become a doctor?
Well,
Because
I'm thinking you're talking about fainting, and I'm thinking of those fainting goats.
yes,
Oh,
yes,
they get scary, and
exactly.
they just faint on the
Exactly.
side of the road, and you're like, "What
Exactly.
the heck?" Yeah.
I know, and during my teenage years, I was part of what we call the St John's Ambulance, which is a first aid group in England. But we would be called into every major event, so this wasn't minor. So if something happened to someone, we were the ones that were called in. Why on earth I did this? But I do know, Julie, I mean, from past life, I was very much part of the Knights Templar or the Templars who took care of people during the Crusades. So I think I was going back to that time of being someone who could aid people from that very high level. I know that to be true. So anyway, I kind of, when anybody, I just prayed nobody becomes sick when I was on call as a teenager because I would have fainted. But I think my sole choice was you got to learn how to have better boundaries. And I wanted to become a doctor. And people would say to me, wow, how can you work with, dead bodies? I was like, they're dead, they don't suffer. Uh, How can you do operations? They're asleep, they don't suffer. But I did an awful lot of ER, working in that area, which actually got me to a place where I could not faint, but could be effective in my work. And that's really what took me into that. But I will say, after 10 years, 15 years, I realized I had to bring all my complementary medicines back in,
Mhm.
and so I was very fortunate to be in a practice where I brought people in to my practice with a group of partners where we would teach everybody homeopathy, aromatherapy, psychic things, crystals, and it was just like, this is how it should be, a really integrative health center rather than just, so I was never forced. I only ever worked with people who were dedicated to helping the patient, not to helping the drug industry, let me put it that way.
Mhm.
And I had a wonderful practice of people who were just eager to learn, what can I do for myself? How can I help my children? So that's what happened.
The Knights Templar are always that topic is always so fascinating to me. For those who are listening and watching, please describe who the Knights Templar were and the Knights, I should say, who they were, what their mission was, and then how it kinda all evolved and what was your part in that?
So the Templars were very much seen as maybe they became the soldiers that were helping the people who wanted to go from especially Britain to Jerusalem, and these were the Crusades. Now, I'm not saying what they did was right because there was an awful lot of killing along the way.
Right.
My group were called the Hospitallers. And they were the Hospitallers of St. John. And it's always debatable which St. John we're talking about, John the Baptist or which John. But these were, alongside the soldiers, were the hospital people, the medics. And they started up in about 1060. And they had their hospitals that they would help, treat people on these crusades. And they went from Jerusalem, they went from into Malta and Rhodes, they kept being pushed out of places. But they wore the uniform that I ended up wearing when I was a child as a St. John's Ambulance person. And it was like, let's put that uniform on back again and let's take care of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I see that when I'm doing past life work with clients, that there's a semblance of a script
Yes.
that will come forward in multiple lifetimes. And it's just a different perspective of the same script, or a similar script, if you will, different time, different place, different set of circumstances, but same basic script, which is
Yeah.
what you're describing as well. Weren't they the ones, though, that were the guardians of the Holy Grail, which was the
They were.
chalice? Yeah.
They were, but I like to say I stayed on that hospital side, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of merging went on between the Templars who wore a red uniform or a red cross, I think, and me that wore the black and the white.
Mhm.
And actually, when I was in Rhodes many, many years ago, literally, 30 years ago, I slipped into one of those parallel lives. And I was
Tell
walking
us about that. You can't tease us with that one, girl, without telling us. What
Well, I
happened?
never actually had such a strong, and I call them parallel lives, which I think is what you're calling them. They're an essence of me. So I'm walking up this street, which is a cobbled street in Rhodes, which is one of the islands of Greece. And all of a sudden, instead of wearing a summer dress, I'm wearing this thick cloak that is dragging along the floor. And instead of having, sandals on, I'd got boots on. And I can hear myself walking up the steps. And everything around me when I looked into it was back probably in the 1500s. I think that's where they were there. So I looked at the houses on either side and everything was there. But what was most significant for me was that I, in that time, was worried. I was troubled. And the biggest thing I took from it was I was troubled that what we were doing was out of alignment with our original design.
Mm.
And I was saying, we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this. This isn't what we were meant to be doing. And I'm walking along the street and up this hill, which I can still see. And that was the biggest thing I brought back was this, we mustn't go out of alignment with what our original mission was.
Mhm.
And then a child cried in 20, whatever year I was there, probably the 1900s, 1960 or 70. And all of a sudden, everything's back to that time zone. It was probably the 1990s I was there. So everything's happened. And I looked around and now I'm back into 1990s and not 1500s. But what I brought back with me was this importance of not losing sight of what your mission is for the need of, and of course the Templars became very rich. They, took a lot of the wealth. And it wasn't that I was saying don't have money, but it was keep aligned to what your mission is. And don't let other temptations take you off course.
How did that relate to your life then at that point in the 1990s?
And I was working as a doctor then, and I was working I now had moved into my complementary medicine. I was practicing mainly integrative health in a private practice outside the National Health Service. But it was very much saying, stay on track.
Mhm.
Money had never, I mean, I used to take a year off every 7 years to make sure I never got caught up in a trap. And I would take a sabbatical away from everything. So I'd never see myself, as either needing or being needed.
Mhm.
And that's something I had done. So I think I was at that point where it's like, it's really important to stay on track, not just to my mission to be a doctor or a healer, but my higher mission. And I'm sure you've had that, Julie. I mean, so many times my spirit guide, I mean, again, I call them that, but the universe
Right.
They've said, no, 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 that's not what we want you to do. And I've kind of had a discussion with them like, yeah, but look how much good I'm doing. Or look how they go, no, 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 we're not
Yeah.
interested.
Yeah. Me too.
I've changed
It-
course many times, even though I've tried to persuade them, like, look, look.
And don't you find that for me, it was just like, why am I arguing with these spirit guides? They have universal intelligence. They know what the deal is. I'm telling them, no, I can't do what they want me to do. And I'm telling them all the reasons why I can't. And they just treat me like a Nike and they just say, yeah, just go do it. Just
Yeah,
do it.
that's
And now
that's
it's
true.
just
But
after all
it's
these
not so
years.
much I argue with them that I can't do it. It's more like, are you sure this isn't what you want me to do? You know?
Well, it's the same thing. It's,
Yeah, it's
they want you.
when I was in general practice and I thought, and I was doing a lot of good. I had this lovely practice and we were teaching all of this. And I said, look, but look what I'm doing. And they said, and there are many people ahead waiting for you to stop doing that. And that's always been the part of, I don't know if that's ever been your part of your life, Julie, but it's always been like I have a very strong rescuer archetype.
Mhm.
Look how helpful I'm being. And they're going, and yes, there are people ahead. I've always seen myself like standing on a windowsill, a window, and they've been saying jump, which I'm happy to do, but I've been going, yeah, but look at all these people who I'm going to have to leave behind. And they go, you haven't seen the people who are ahead waiting for you.
Mhm.
And I think that's strong in many people I work with who are also working in the healthcare professions. It's very tempting to stay with those who you think you can help, but not recognize the ones who you're going to be able to help.
Yeah. Well, and every path all merges into this big mush of a soup of what you're doing, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's what my spirit guide said. Everything you've done has prepared you to do this stuff now. Now just go do it.
I suppose I'm just saying, Julie, how often, I'll call it my personality, and I'm not the only person who could, I won't be persuaded necessarily by money or something or fame, but I would by back to my childhood where people are suffering.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so that's still a pull on me. I mean, it's just part of who I am. That I always say, if I didn't care, then I might as well not be on the planet. So it's always a balance point between caring too much and
Yeah.
not caring at all. That's what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
part of me that it isn't arguing with the spirit. It's more like, yeah, we know that that's painful for you to let go, not let go of what you're doing, but to let people suffer. But we need you to move on. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's part
You
of who I
mentioned that
am.
you mentioned that you have ancestors, especially women, and I want to get into that later on in our conversation because I know that's where a lot of your focus is now. And where do you think that started? Where did all of this come from? It sounds like it's a DNA thing with you, but do you think it goes back even farther than that? You've mentioned star seeds. You that
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really know that. I mean, I've always known that I didn't come from here, like many of us have. Okay. And that's why when I would go out the top of my head as a child, I would consider I was going back to my star family. It definitely didn't just feel like going out. It felt like I was going home.
Mhm.
And someone says, well, where do you come from? I know I don't come from this galaxy. I know I don't come probably from this universe. And I'm saying that because it's become clear. So I'm not particularly interested, but I know that the frequency that I go back home to is one that I really resonate and enjoy being with. And, obviously. So my people, I couldn't describe who they are in terms of the star people, but I know that I enjoy this frequency very much. Um, so where does it come from? It comes, yes, that's my DNA that I brought in. I know, for instance, I know this, I think I wrote this, I have a very strong connection to the whales of this world. I love swimming with whales. I love swimming with dolphins, but whales are my people. I have a very strong connection to dragons, but I see that as a part of that. My world has been very much connected to holograms and alchemy. So I know all of these are parts of who I am. And a lot of my work has been about not just shifting consciousness, but understanding consciousness as in quantum physics is being brought together. I'm trying to say is I'm not just trying to change people's consciousness. I'm like, whoa, if we understood what it means to be a conscious human being, it would blow our minds. That's what I'm saying.
And then you chose to be part of a family of healers, it sounds like.
I did, but that wise woman, I mean, when I was a child, because I lived in England then, we have very strong psychic organizations, the College of Psychic Studies, the Spiritual Association of Great Britain. And I would go there with my mum, and we would have all these wonderful mediums and trance channelers and artists, and it just felt like, yes, what you're trying to describe, it's all about understanding the mechanism of consciousness. I hope that makes sense. It's not just doing I mean, I love looking at what makes people sick, but what is the consciousness that's giving the illness in order to bring healing or taking us to a higher level? That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Let's unpack that for a minute. What does make people sick? Is it more of a physical thing? Is it more of an emotional thing? Is it a combo platter? What have you
Yeah.
found?
Illness is a messenger from the soul that we need to change. And so what I call it, illness is not so much a failure, it's a solution.
Ooh, that's quotable, girl. Solution. Okay. Yeah. Okay, say
So
more.
the first thing illness is a messenger from the soul that we have to change. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, when I'm working with someone, I will say, what was going on in your life when the symptoms appeared?
Mhm.
And people who have never done anything spiritually will say, I know why I have cancer. And I go, if you know why you have cancer, why are we not listening to you as doctors? Because we never, I was brought up to listen to my patients. Nobody ever listens anymore.
Mhm.
So if people, because the ability to describe, and I've had people say, I had to get cancer for this reason, or I got cancer for this reason, or I had my heart attack for this reason. And I talk to the body, the body
What
with,
are some of those reasons? Can you
well,
give us some
you know,
examples?
I guess I can. I think probably these people, may or may not hear, but there was one young man who had testicular cancer of the testes. And he told his story, and I think I've written this in the books, that he was a very high flyer, he was very clever, and when he was 28, which is a very important age, we often change things at 28, he was headhunted for a job. But he was also brought up very moralistically. And once he got into this job, he realized these people were more immoral than he wanted to be.
Mhm.
And he found that they were saying, look, yeah, you would do this job, but we're going to hide some money. And by the time he got the cancer, which at 33, and again, 33 is a very important age. It's an age where we start doing what we came here to do. He got the cancer at 33. And he said, I had to have the cancer because it was the only way to get out of a job that was immoral, even though my wife wanted the money. And I said, why didn't you tell them to stick their job? And he said, I didn't have the balls to do it.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
And the language is always in the body. So the
Yeah.
body never gets it wrong. And I said to him, well, who wore the trousers at home? And he said, my father was a lovely man, but every time there was any conflict, he ran away. And so my mother wore the trousers, but he never was taught by another man how to have the balls to stand up for something. And so I said to him, well, what I saw with him is that there was nothing, he was someone I saw for one occasion, which often happens when I'm traveling. And he tried a lot of things, but he really wasn't trying to get better because he didn't know how to say, stick your job. I don't need it. So that's the sort of things I've met over and over again.
So when you identify that with a patient, let's say he was a patient that
Yeah.
was gonna come back to you, what's your next step
My next
once
step
you
is me
identify that?
literally asking the questions of, so he had done a little therapy, a little this, a little that, a little this, but every time he came away with saying, it doesn't work. In other words, I had to learn, Julie, that just because someone's asking you for help, it doesn't mean they want to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a huge proportion of my clients. Again, not disrespecting me or them, but once I give them information to say, this is what's showing, then they have a choice whether or not they want to go along that path or not.
Mm-hmm.
I had another lady who had a very hard breast lump. And I said, your attitude, after a lot of discussion, she said, I said, your hardness of your breast lump is as hard as your attitude. And I said, if you don't change your attitude, then you're going to die. And she said, I want to die and show these people just what they've done to me.
Oh, my.
You see, and I think this isn't taught enough to healers or to medicine, that it's got nothing to do really with the drugs. It's what is the attitude that makes you want to hold on to this? And people suffering, people don't actually care if they're suffering as much as they fear not so. That's what they're familiar with.
Because it's become their identity?
Yes. So, it's like someone who says, my husband is, beats me up. And you go, well, why don't you leave? Oh, well, I can't. I have to go back. And it's so familiar and comfortable in the most excruciating, painful way that they wouldn't want to leave. And that, I think, any of us who have been in this, I've been doing this 45 years, it's just like, no, just because someone knows the information, it doesn't mean they want to change their patterns. And that's why I say illness is a solution, that sometimes you have to have something so dramatic that it changed. So one lady I remember who had brain tumor and it was stage 4, and they told her, okay, you've got a month to live. So she said, right, if I've got a month to live, I'm going to go home and I'm going to get rid of all those friends I don't like. I'm going to kick out my ex-husband who keeps wandering back. I'm going to tell my 29-year-old son to go and do his own washing. I'm going to put an answer machine saying, don't leave any messages unless they're very nice. And of course, she lived when I saw her, she was 2 years on from that diagnosis. Perfectly well. But, it's, again, I'm not saying dying is wrong. Maybe that's a solution. And I've seen many people on their deathbed.
Right.
I'll give you one more example. Was a gentleman who had a heart attack. He was his 3rd heart attack and he was in hospital. And this one was a fairly serious one. And he called me over and he said to me, I've never said this before, but for the first time in my life, I want to live. And a few minutes later, he died. But, his soul had been waiting for 72 years to say, I want to live. So it's not about length. It's just like sometimes it's a crisis point, like being on our deathbed, that we make a decision that changes our whole soul's path or fulfills whatever destiny, making peace with someone. And I've got, as you could hear, I have many stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always
It's
say,
never as simplistic. When people say, oh, it's because you're doing this. No, it's never as simplistic as that. Never just about, oh, change your attitude. It's, it really has to be whatever my soul needs me to do in this moment, I will do. Whether it's I die tomorrow or I get better tomorrow or I make peace with someone or I don't make peace with someone. I don't know. But, that's we make it too simplistic about health and healing.
and there's always an emotional component. That's been my experience. Always, 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 always.
There is, but it's often screwed. I mean, what we know is that if you express the right emotion at the right time, you actually have a positive buzz. So it's the inappropriate use of emotion, and that then festers, etc. So, being happy, so many people are told, don't be sad, don't be fearful. No, be it, because that's what's going to get you moving on, So you're right, there is an emotion, but it's often a festering one and maybe actually the inaccurate one. Oh, I'm so angry about, no, you're not, you're sad or you're fearful or you're happy, whatever, sometimes we get locked into a belief that again is not accurate.
And then how do you discern which is which? It just comes to you in your head?
Yeah, I think that's where I use my intuition. I go, no, that's because I can feel the difference. I go, no, you're not sad. You're angry. Oh, I can't be angry. Everybody told me I had to not be angry. Be angry,
Yeah.
And as you say, emotion, what we would say is emotion is energy in motion. if we're going to bring about change, we have to energize one of our emotions. So it's either cry, be angry, whatever you do, but move the energy.
Right. Right. I get with my clients, Christine, I'll get a like a year usually if it's this lifetime, and I'll say, okay, 1987. And
Okay.
they'll say, okay, I was 5 and this
Okay.
happened. They know
Yes, they do.
instantly.
That's
I
right.
mean, like
That's right.
in a nanosecond, they
Yes,
know.
they do.
So that's spirit saying to me, okay, 1985.
Yes.
And I say it to them, and it's fascinating.
It is. I don't always get the date like you do. I often get the age.
Mhm.
Something went on at
Yeah,
this age. It's
same
just
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, same
And
thing.
and I'll say, what went on then, because that's really where this kind of timeline separation took place.
Mhm.
Because at that point, there was something that happened that didn't get, again, illness is trying to bring you back on track,
Right.
or divorce, but people often don't. And what's sad for me is they don't see the opportunity being offered them. And they very quickly want to go back to the situation, as I say, they want to get back on the lousy path that is killing them.
Mhm.
Give me the treatment, give me the healing, tell me what I need to do so I can get back on that lousy path that I hate, but it's familiar.
But is that just because that's what we've been taught?
We are taught it, but the fear of change, I've taught a course called Courage to Change for so many years, and the fear of change is so huge because it's so unfamiliar, and they don't have an inner trusting that we have. I've never known what it was like to be disconnected from spirit. I've never known what it was like not to be loved by spirit. And again, not in a soupy way, more of a connected way. It's just like, how could I disconnect? And I think that when people have no connection, their fear of letting go of what they do have a connection to on the outside is greater. But when you have a connection, you're like, okay, I can let go and go into this place and then, move into some new space. And that's the sad part. I think that the light, if you have no inner light, if you've never gone inside and really strengthened that inner light, the fear of change is much greater.
All right, let's back up a few paces here. I got some questions for you about medicine and what you did with NHS and all that. I find that fascinating. Einstein said that basically future medicine is going to be the medicine of frequencies. Sounds like you agree with him on that.
Right.
And it's interesting to me how, and I was on the supply side of the hospital supply industry for 30 years as an inventor and manufacturer and web
Right.
early on.
Right.
And I looked this up in preparing for our chat today. The global health tech market
Right.
is estimated to be $12 trillion by
Wow.
2030.
Wow.
$12 trillion.
Wow.
And certainly we've used energy in tech in the allopathic arena with sonograms and EKGs and EEGs and lithotripsy and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm seeing is that physicians are more open, the ones that I talk to and the ones that send their clients, their patients to me when they can't figure out what's going on. There seems to be a shifting in the zeitgeist of
Mm.
people saying, okay, I've gone to 5 doctors over the last 10 years. I have the same symptoms. It's not working. So maybe I'm going to try Christine, or I'm going to try Julie, or I'm going to try one of our colleagues in this space. Are you starting to see a shift? And also, I want you to tell everybody about when you opened the first holistic department in the British National Health System. When I read that about you, I thought, "Oh, this is somebody I gotta talk to." Yeah, so tell us about all of that.
Yes, that's a really good point. So I was just as you would say, the highest level of healing, sound, color, and geometry. Right? That's our future, and that's what we're seeing with these med beds. And really, what we're talking about is using frequency.
Mhm.
So I have an awful lot of knowledge about sound. I've also used color a lot, and I've used symbolism. So to me, they're the three that are really coming into their fore now. I'm as a homeopath, which really to me is also very high frequency because it's about choosing the right frequency for that individual. And I might be jumping a bit, but the key why they come to you, why they may come to me, is that we are able to pick up on their frequency. So what I say as an intuitive, people say, well, am I intuitive? Yes, you are, and you have lots of information. People might have information, but that doesn't matter as much as you being able to tap into the frequency of the client or the patient you're working with, which I'm sure exactly what you would say.
Yeah.
So what I describe I'll use like a door, but it's the same as homeopathy. What we say is, if you just push the door lightly, nothing's going to move. But that might be right for one client. Whereas if you blast through the door, you knock the client out and they never come back to you. So to me, the use of intuition in the healing arts or anything we do, whatever we're doing, counseling, etc., has to be my ability intuitively to pick up what is the right frequency to use in order to meet you where I don't scare you away, but I actually do open a door. And I'm sure that's what you'd agree with, isn't it?
How I approach it is it's spirit working through me and with me to help them heal themselves, because nobody heals anybody else, in my opinion. So I'm not that concerned about editing things. I mean, certainly I'm kind, but I believe I'm the conduit. I'm the messenger. It's spirit working through me and with me. And I think we're saying the same thing.
I think we're saying the
getting
same thing because it's not
intuitive.
that, when I'm talking about intuition, of course, I'm talking about spirit
Yeah.
work. But if
Right.
I use my voice like this,
Yeah.
very different than if I use it like this. So I'm saying we're not just pure vessels. We are being used as tuning forks, as
Right.
orchestras. And that's why I was brought up with a lot of healers, and I appreciate healing as just because it's very much part of the British culture, the National Federation of Spiritual Healers. But when I would hear them say, oh, I'm just a vessel, I go, no, you're not.
Yeah.
You have to refine that vessel and use it in ways that people would hear you differently, depending on what your hand motion is, whether you touch them, whether you don't touch them. And I
Yeah.
think that isn't taught enough.
Well, and I always think of, and I am by no means a Bible thumper, and I am by no means somebody that knows the Bible well enough to quote it like a lot of people I know are. But I always think of where two or more are gathered in my name.
Yeah.
That saying out of the Bible. I can't even tell you what the verse or the chapter or anything was,
Yeah.
but I know the saying.
That's right. That's right.
And I think you bring up a really good point, which is when we connect into our clients, we're on a frequency that is their frequency of what do they need to help them heal.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly, Julie. And I go back to my being able to see all these different characters. I see them like, I don't know, I always see them like people around a board table or a family table. And I go, okay, who do I need to speak to first?
Right.
And I do astrology with my husband, and it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, I could talk to this one who's got the problem, but I actually need to talk to that one who is running the show. And sometimes, as I'm sure you've done, I've found the magician, So there's this really strong character that keeps jumping in when I'm trying to talk to this character. And it's like, hang on a minute, just quieten down. I'll speak to you later. Does that make sense? It's like we have to talk to all of them at once.
Yeah.
It's not one person. It's like, yeah, I know the soul, but the soul is asking me to talk to this one and then get this one to step forward and this one to step back. And that's what I do. I feel like I'm this, not magician. I'm kind of reorganizing things on different levels. That's what I say I do.
Yeah. You're the director.
I'm the director, and also I can see the different levels, and it's like, okay, let's bring you down to here. You need to step back up and go and have a holiday, I often call it, because, and I'll just step into that if that's okay. I talk to people about their protector, and that we all have protectors that come in when we're young who have been protective of the soul or protective of something because of our childhood, but they're often running the show now, even though we're in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and they keep trying to jump in when you're trying to help. So you have to kind of talk to that and say, You were really helpful, but could you just step out and maybe go and have a long holiday with a one-way ticket? You know?
I
And I
love
think
it.
people don't realize how many characters, that's why I think I could see all of that as a child, how many characters they've got on board and which ones have got the loudest voice.
The I this question keeps coming into my head, so I have to
Yeah.
ask it. Did you just breeze through medical school because you had access to all of this intuitive information? Was it how was medical school for you?
Oh,
Did you have situations where they were teaching you something and your intuition's going, "That's not right.
I
That's
think
not
I
how
was
that works."
so fortunate. First of all, I got into a college called the Royal Free in London that was set up for women in the late 1800s, I think, because women weren't allowed into the men's colleges.
Mm.
So here you go back to my female lineage. I went to an all-female high school, and then I happened to go to a female medical school that had been set up by that. By the time I arrived in the 70s, we had half and half men and women, but the majority of the consultants were all female. So I never knew that there was anything about sexual discrimination because these women were like, I mean, they were feminine, but nobody messed with them.
Yeah.
I'm saying is I think that feminine approach was within all my, I was so fortunate. The kindness of the people I was under, my consultants, the care for the patient. That was what really made it for me.
Mhm.
Because there was no, it was people cared. We
Mhm.
cared for people. And we were told, coming back to your previous question, that you made a diagnosis, 80% listening, 15% touching, 5% tests. Now
Mhm.
it's the opposite way round.
Right.
And so they devalued the art of listening, they devalued the art of touching. And now I see the most horrendous situations where, I mean, my friend just had an appendix out by a robot, and she had all these different problems with her body. And I said, well, who touched you? She said, oh no, the doctor was in a corner running this robot. And it's like, oh my God, where are we going? So you were asking about technology. I have a real concern that we're taking these important qualities of that can't be undermined, that touch, compassion, listening. We know they make the healing process better, the immune system better, the brain better. But no, let's put it into the robot's hands, and we don't need people.
Mhm.
It just appalls me. So
Interesting take on that. I haven't thought about that, but you bring up a really good point. Yeah, there was a doctor, God love him, Dr. Truss. I had yeast overgrowth for the first 40 years of my life because I was put on antibiotics as a one-day-old. I
right.
got a
Oh my God.
staph infection in the nursery when I was born.
Right.
And, you know, antibiotics 4 and 5 times a year. And Dr. Truss, God bless him, he was in his 80s when I met him here in Birmingham. And he told me exactly what you just said. He said, "I was taught it was 80% listening to the patient and all of that." And so I help a lot of people with what he taught me when he got me well, and I think of him as being sitting on a cloud looking down at me going, "You go, girl," 'cause
I love it. I love it.
crucified. I mean, this guy went to Cornell Medical School.
Yeah.
He was a professor in the Cornell Medical, you know,
Yeah.
college. He was just very, very highly respected, had all the credentials, and then he started publishing on gut health,
Right.
and his colleagues just crucified him,
Yeah.
torpedoed him, even with all those Ivy League chops.
Yeah.
And so he just went on about his business, and he said, "I don't care.
Yeah.
My patients are getting well."
Yeah.
And it got to the point where he would have people fly in even from abroad, and they'd be in wheelchairs, and it'd be their gut. He'd get their gut healthy,
Yeah.
and they would go back to live a normal life, and he said,
Yeah.
"I don't need the academics
Yeah.
to approve of what I'm doing now." So, I always feel like he's with me when I'm talking
I
to
love it.
somebody about their gut,
I
and
love
I
it.
just think, is that part of the reason why I moved to Birmingham? Absolutely, I met him a month after I moved here.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and he got me well with
I know.
with not a bunch of tests. He said there really aren't tests for a lot of this stuff.
No,
He said there's not a lot of money to be made in it, which
no,
is why nobody focuses on it. But it's the root cause of most issues in
yes.
the body, and especially with our food
Well,
being,
it is. It is. And
such a mess.
you say all of that is coming through, and the gut has become such an important part, as you're saying. And, and I'm going back a little bit into looking at the mitochondria. I mean, there's a lot of interest now of like, what makes us energetic? What brings that energy? What makes good boundaries? And I think there's so much going on, they say in social media, for instance, where nobody touches, nobody communicates, nobody looks in each other's eyes. And we're seeing more anxiety, more depression, more gut problems because you haven't got this sense of self.
Mhm.
You have to be with people to get a sense of self, if that makes sense. You have to feel that you are your own unique individual that's meeting other people to make that happen. And
There's
people
a
are losing themselves.
there's a, I don't know what to call it, a show, used to be like a mini series, I'm dating
Right,
myself,
right.
and it's on Netflix, and Tim, my husband, and I finished watching it last night. It's called Sweet Magnolias. It's
Okay,
about
yeah.
a small town in South Carolina, and, everybody's all doing stuff together all the time, and I told Tim when we were watching it last night, the season finale, I said, "There is definitely something to be said about the neighbors and the families and the generations that are all staying in the small towns, and now everybody leaves, and the
Yes.
families are all spread out all over, and we're missing that." And I said to him last night, "How much is that affecting not only our lives,
Yeah.
but the depression issues and our health?" And to your point, I think it's affecting it a lot. So what's the answer?
I don't know, I will say, relatively quickly, they did a study back in the 60s, you might know about this, 60s or 70s, where they were looking at heart disease. And they were looking at where was the lowest degree of heart disease in the States. And they found it, I think it was in Pennsylvania. And they said, oh, wow, these people must not smoke, drink, do anything. But it was a small community of Italians who
Right.
smoked, drank, ate everything, you know, and they were healthy because they had a place in this community. What
Mhm.
they found with heart disease, it is about that ability to be part of something, connected, valued. And, we have more heart disease because people have become separated, isolated, even though they think they're being terribly connected they're not. Because, we just know that touch and looking at people is what is needed, and communicating and being heard, all of these things that we're losing out on. No.
My husband used to travel a lot, and when my son went to college and my dog died, I was home by myself, sometimes for a week or more at a time. I would find myself, Christine, after work, after I talked to people on the phone all day, I just go to Target and walk around. I get a shopping cart and I'd walk around Target, not necessarily looking to buy anything,
Yeah.
but just to be around people.
Yes.
And then my thing at Target is I always hide money. I always hide a bill or whatever I have, and I'll hide it, but behind a box of
Yes.
cereal or something. So somebody, when they pick it up the shelf,
Yes.
it's a
Of
surprise to them. But to that, back to the energy thing, I needed the energy of
yes.
being around people instead of being in my home by myself
Yes.
for days on end, even though I was talking to people all day long. It's
Yes.
different. But back to my question, what's the answer? How do we fix that? How do we change that in our own lives?
You have something like AA or Al-Anon or whatever, and I know that, someone was saying to me, she said, I even though I'm not an alcoholic and I don't necessarily have an alcoholic family, she said, I enjoyed going there just because I could talk to someone about who I was and be heard. And I thought, wow, that's what made her feel as if she was part of something.
Mm.
We used to run cancer support groups. This goes back to what I was doing in the mid-80s with my, general practice. We ran courses, but we realized it wasn't about whether people had cancer. People just needed, we ran relaxation classes and Tai Chi classes and all of these things because people needed to talk. And that, the heart chakra is linked to the tongue.
Mhm.
So when you cut off the tongue, when you stop talking, your heart gets ill.
Wow.
And I had an
Never
opera
thought of
singer.
it that way.
I had an opera singer who had his first heart attack when he stopped singing opera, and his wife had said, "Oh, please don't sing around the house." And I said, "Please go back to singing again." And
Wow.
he said to me, "I've spoken to you more in this hour than I've spoken to my wife in 25 years."
Oh my goodness.
And there's so many people they're not speaking from their heart. They're
Mhm,
not being heard from their heart, from their soul,
mhm,
because people then jump in and take over the conversation or compete. I mean, who cares what you've done? I want you to hear me.
mhm.
That there's so few places where you are heard, and something like AA allows that to happen.
Well, it used to be the churches too,
Yes,
that
exactly.
people were very
Belonging to a
involved in their
church. Yes,
churches, and that's really the attendance has really waned,
yes,
especially here in America since COVID.
yes,
And it used to be people would go and they would have a common goal to
yes,
rebuild somebody's home or have a barbecue to
yes,
raise money for something or
yes.
something along those lines, and that's changed as
And I was brought up that way as well. Our church would be the community place, but
right.
it was about the community, the church, the school, everybody knew everybody. And as you
Mhm,
said, that the extended families have gone, people are too busy. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. And when I hear that, I'm too busy to talk to you, it's like, well, that's not what I need. I need, not that I need it, but I hear people on the television, I watch it. It's like, how can you say you're too busy when someone says, I need to talk?
mhm,
How not now.
yeah.
I mean, how often
So back again, what's the answer? What can we do to foster that
well,
be
we would all say that if you've got a family, switch off those damn boom, 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 booms, start to talk to each other, communicate, and it doesn't but, and I do a lot of traveling, and I see these tiny children on their, just play with your iPad because I'm busy. It's like, no, we have to communicate. Communicate is so important to us. And find ways of touching. Again, it went through a whole time where no child could be touched at school in case it was wrong, and no, it got to extremes. Well, everybody needs to be touched, and sometimes they say when a massage therapist goes into an old people's home, they'll say, "This is the first time I've been touched for 20 years since my husband died."
Oh my. Wow.
So that's why they bring in dogs, which is fine, let's have a pet. But, let's start to bring in ways that we can bring people back into, I hear you. And that's why our work is so important.
Mhm.
Listening to people because people just want to be heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And for people who live alone, if
Yes,
they're mobile, they can and ambulatory, get involved in something. Go
yes,
volunteer at the hospital, go volunteer at a
yeah,
museum, at the library,
yeah,
read to kids, volunteer at schools. Go read to little kids at the school. I did that when my
absolutely.
son was little. One of the nuns in his school when he was in kindergarten,
Right.
she approached me in the carpool lane one day and she said, "I have children that just need somebody to sit with them and have them practice their reading. Would you be interested in that?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I would go in there a couple of times a week for an hour, and I would spend an hour with one child, and we would just sit on a bench
Mhm,
outside, and he would read to me, and it
mhm,
was just so much fun, and then I'd bring him, little presents and stuff, and
mhm.
that was a kid that just needed a little extra attention, and you know what? His reading scores shot off the chart.
Yeah.
He I wasn't teaching him anything, I was just listening to him. To your point, I haven't thought of that in years.
I think
Uh,
that's beautiful, and I think it's just so, when there are so many people who have so many gifts, and again, as you said, it's just the sitting with someone. We used to have lots of that. You could go to a library, someone would, someone who had time would sit and listen to or talk to someone. Uh,
mhm,
I love co-counseling, and I've done course, where I've said to people, "Okay, you talk for 3 minutes, and the other person must not say anything except listen." And both individuals had trouble. One said, I've never spoken for 3 minutes without being interrupted." And the other one says, "Oh, I want to jump in and tell them what to do." It's like, can we just talk? Can we just listen to someone for 5 minutes and be present? Then
mhm,
we get 5 minutes to do the same back.
mhm.
And you're not fiddling around or, "Hang on a minute, I've just got to answer this," or, "My phone's going off." It's amazing how distracted we are. from each other.
Because we all have the attention spans of gnats now because of
Yeah.
technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to you integrating your health concepts into the British National Health
Yeah.
System service. What is it? Service, right?
Yes.
NHS is service.
Yeah.
I wanna hear that story. How did that come about?
Well, I think I was very fortunate to go find a practice, as I came from this very, not female driven, but very compassionate place, went into general practice, and I was very, very fortunate to get into a practice which was just outside London, and wonderful partners. And we had this big meeting room at the top. And I think because of, I first got involved with, teaching relaxation. I said, could I teach relaxation? They, yes, Christine, and we'd use this big meeting room. And we would have people, people going in and out of London, commuters, but they'd come in for the course so they could learn to relax. Then we brought Tai Chi in. And then every month, this was in 1985, 1986, we would teach them a new subject. I'd get an aromatherapist in, I'd get a crystal healer in, I'd get a homeopath. And we'd fill the room every month with 50 people that's all we could get in the room. And I taught them, I said, okay, here's the 5 remedies, the homeopathy you need for your children. I'd give them 5 remedies in aromatherapy to have at home. And I said to, myself, I've almost made myself redundant because they all knew what to do in the first few hours of an illness before they called me. Now, obviously, I told them to call me if it was an emergency, but the parents would be saying, okay, I'm doing this, Christine. I've given them that homeopathy. I'm putting them in a steam room with their croup. I'm doing this. I'm putting music on. I was training them, which it should be, to take care of their family so they didn't feel helpless. And they knew when to call me or call my partners, and we worked together on all of this. And that's the way it should be. It should be, here's what you can do, not for yourself without me, but people feel so helpless, they don't know what to do anymore.
Mhm.
But, when you and I, maybe I don't know what your age is, when I was brought up, we knew what to do. My parents knew what to do. If you had a temperature or if you had this, they knew what to do, but we've lost that knowledge.
Well, because we just think that there's a pill that's gonna fix it,
Yes.
and you gotta call the doctor
Yes.
and ask them. But, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, if you had a fever or if you were coughing, and I even had a few nights where it was a whiskey and honey shooter.
There you go. Well,
I
I
tell
asked,
you.
yes, I know
Yeah.
that it depends on, I asked people around the world, what were you given? And whiskey was one of them, and
With honey. Honey, there's
yeah, and others would be chicken soup, and
oh,
some
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you'd have your own bed, and some of them you'd be cuddling up with mum. I mean, it felt like, wow, we knew what to do to bring healing,
Mhm.
and people are so scared now of doing the wrong thing instead of thinking, well, what feels best is to hold my child or, you know,
Mhm.
calm them down or whatever it is.
Yeah. One of our, grandsons, when he was little, he's now 16, he was sick in daycare, and
Mm.
so I got the call, "Can you go get him?" And I did. He was 6 months old, and he'd thrown up several times, and they had him laying in a crib just with his diaper on, no blanket, no anything. I picked that baby up, and it was like he was going, "Oh, baby, thank God you're here."
Yeah.
And then I brought him home. I had beach towels all over my car. I thought, "This kid's gonna throw up all the way home,"
Yes,
you know?
yes,
He's in the back seat. He
yes.
didn't, thank you, but I held him, I think, and rocked him for about 4 or 5 hours, and you know what? He was fine after that. I think he had some bug that he got out of his system, and he just
Yes.
needed to be held, but I'll always remember that. He was just as a six-month-old, grabbed onto my neck like, "Oh, thank God you're here," with this little tiny baby, and I just kept him hydrated. I don't know what else to do.
You
I
knew what
was
to do.
yeah.
And then, and unfortunately, and again, would think almost 20 years ago, they put out an edict, it might have been in England, you know, nurses are not allowed to bring the child on their lap. They may be abusing them. You're not, a school teacher is not allowed to put sun cream on a child. For goodness sake, I appreciate there was abuse, but to take away all that comfort It's
Mhm.
just ridiculous. And it was often grandmothers they would bring in because they say, well, grandmother's not going to abuse a child. It's like, come on, know.
Yeah.
Children need that touch, that listening, and they get better.
Mhm. They
Or at
do.
least they know they're not alone and their immune system then can relax or do what it's meant to be doing in those moments.
That's a really good point. Say more about that, about the immune system relaxing.
Well, we know that, first of all, we know the immune system is made worse when we feel helpless. And that's why I've always known that when we take someone into hospital, we say, we're not going to tell you what we're going to do. We're not going to tell you what's wrong with you. And we're going to take away all the things that you make you feel comfortable. The immune system just drops and everybody gets sick. So we know keeping people at home, that's what we used to try and do, keep people at home amongst their surroundings, telling them as much information as we can, actually helps them to have a strong immune system. And we also know, come back to touch again, that touch increases the oxytocin. The oxytocin is essential to feeling, having a strong mitochondria, having a strong immune system. That touch is part of what makes the immune system strong.
Wow. Beautifully said. I haven't heard it put that way before, but so profound. That's a golden nugget right there. You say women are
Can I
natural
just say one
healers.
last I'll just say one last thing. We
Yes.
know, again, these are all the studies that I've seen, and they stand true. When someone looks out, I'm looking at your plants on the wind or behind you. If someone looks out onto greenery, they get better twice as quickly if they look out to a blank wall. Because most people have greenery around them somewhere. And in the olden days, we used to be able to take greenery into a hospital, flowers or a plant. Now, oh, don't take them in, though you're going to have bugs. But actually, that greenery, that contact with what you usually have at home gets you better much quicker.
Well, and it used to be in the sanitariums and those kinds of hospitals before that word meant mental
Yeah.
hospital. I've seen many pictures in the turn of the 20th century where they'd have all these patients lined up in wheelchairs and they just have them sitting in the sun
Yeah.
to
I used
try
to work
and
in a hospital like that, and the patients looked much healthier because they'd sat in
yeah.
the sun all day than their relatives.
Yeah, and they got better faster based on what you're saying because they were outside and they were looking at greenery.
And they were in the sun, and also I used to I worked in one of the very big mental hospitals, and they used to have a lot of fields around them, and everybody worked in the fields and worked with the animals. And then someone said, "Oh, you're using these patients, you're abusing them by making them work in the fields. Bring them back inside." Well, then their mental system went haywire. The ability to connect to nature, to put your roots in the ground, to be amongst animals is the healing. And none of, when you say, what other problems do we have? We have youngsters, especially, who are not going out into nature at all. They're focusing on a two-dimensional screen, like you and I are looking at a two-dimensional screen. They are never going into a three-dimensional world where they embody themselves into the world. And that is causing without that, we have high levels of schizophrenia and disconnect from the body.
And depression too, I would
Depression, anxiety, you're not in something. So when you get, work with horses, all these wonderful things where people are working with horse therapies, you meet something that's bigger than you get into perspective, and then you start to feel, here I am, here the horse is, we have good respect for each other. But this is what we need.
interesting. You say women are natural healers, and you say that Mother Earth holds the mysteries for our spiritual evolution and that we humans are her guests. Please tell us about both of those different topics.
Um, what I like to say is that if I believe that everything is alive, the planet is alive, the sun is a life force. So if our planet is alive, we call her Gaia, and she is a life force in her own right. And that we are born from the heart or the center of Mother Earth. And the center of Mother Earth gives birth to us through her imagination. In other words, I am not taking care of nature, I am nature. And that I am born from her imagination, just as I might have a dream, an idea, and I, grow something from that idea. I believe that our connection to Mother Earth at this time is essential because she, as a living being, a multidimensional being, is already evolving. And the more we spend time in nature and root into her, the more we will evolve with her. But when we're disconnected, then we have a greater difficulty of actually becoming one with the universe, which is what we already are. I hope that makes sense. So and this, I have to give credit to Bashar, who I listen to. He says, if you don't like the dream if you don't like Gaia's dream that you're living in, go and live in another one of her dreams. In other words, when we say the world is, no, that's just from my perspective. If I dissolve back into the heart of Mother Earth and imagine a different dream, that is what I'll see of the world. And women are natural healers because women have this energy of bringing about transformation in ways that masculine energy doesn't. And so women is really what we've been talking about, the ability to embrace someone in their frequency, to hear them, to touch them, is the healing that is bringing forth. It is going to bring forth wholeness and healing for them in a very simple way.
For all of humanity.
Yeah, all of humanity.
Yeah, I
And so
agree. Do you
I don't wanna
believe
say
that resonates then? Does that
yes.
multiply and resonate
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
like waves in a pond when you throw a stone in?
Absolutely. So, and women are the transformers. So we're more like the moon that goes through the different phases where the sun is like the sun that goes up or down. But just to say, from my women's work, the power time of women is either when they're having a period, or if they've stopped having period, not having them, it's at the time of the new moon, which I'm just pointing because we've just had one. That our period and the time of the new moon, the dark moon, are the most powerful times for women because we return back into the oneness, and then we give birth to a new moon, a new egg. So that's why in indigenous cultures, they would so honor the period of a woman, because this was a time where she was dissolving her old structure and bringing forth what the plan was for the new month.
When you say that's when a woman's highest power is, what can that power be used to do or to create?
Okay, so a woman's power is threefold, and it comes from, we would say, the Virgin Mother Crone. All right. So as the moon, and if I use the moon, as the moon is waning, or you could say just before your period, if you're having a period, but as your moon is waning, we are taking in all the emotions of not only ourselves, but other people, and we then transform them into blood if we're having a period. Or if don't have blood, we pour, I put everything I've taken in round the glass of water, put everything into that water and pour it onto Mother Earth. In other words, as the moon wanes, or as we're moving towards our period, we are transforming all the old energy and taking it away from us. So we are the cleansers. That's what I want to say. We are powerful cleansers. Then at the time of our period on new moon, we then go into the oneness of the universe and we say, what new ideas are being brought in? Men can't do that as well as women can. And then the third part of the feminine is to give birth to something new. So the power is in both being able to allow something to die, allow something to be, to merge with the oneness, and then give birth to something new. That is why that time is so powerful for women.
And the something new can range from what to what?
A new idea. But, in a tribe, it would be the men and women would wait and say, so what are we doing this month? Okay, this is what we're going to do. So having that creative time up to the full moon, if you want to say it that way, is a time, get going.
Mm-hmm.
But it might be, okay, I've come back with this new idea. We're going to do the same thing, but we're just going to refine it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I know I'm talking about periods and new moon, but we'll put them together. As we go into the new moon, we need to let go as women, or just before your period, you need to let go of everything that's old, go into the nothingness that offers you so many possibilities. And then on the third day of your period, or the third day of the new moon, you give birth to something new.
Is that why so many women crave sweets and chocolate and things like that as their period is approaching, because they're purging things and they're trying to help themselves feel better as they're purging?
They are the main reason that women have PMS is because they're not being honored. So the week before a period, women should say, I'm not taking on any new projects. See me after my period. Because that is the time where we need to really what they're doing, that we want to withdraw from society. We want to absorb. We want to be introspective in that week before a period, not going out there trying to do something. So it's a time for you to say, sorry, Mum, I'm not visiting you. I'll see you after. We need to start going into our cave. And that's why we do eat sugar and all of those things, because we're trying to go into our cave, but we're struggling with ourselves.
Easier said than done in this
I
work
know.
environment for
If
women.
if we were more honoring, because women, I mean, I don't want a woman who's on her period, treating me, massaging me, because she's letting go of things and she's putting them on me. So if we really honored this, my friend who is a Native American, she would say women should not serve food for the first 3 days of their period, because the men don't want to eat that food because she's letting go of all the old emotions and putting them into the food that they're then eating. So the men won't eat the food. So
How do you get around that? You
well,
ask your
you
waitress,
could
"Oh, excuse
obviously
me, are you
get the
on my
men to
period?"
cook the food. The men to cook the food, the men would cook the food. That's what they understood.
Yeah.
Or if you're on your own, you could, obviously it's not so much of a problem on your own, but if you're living with someone else, you could put the food in the freezer before you have your period. But we don't understand this amazing ability of women to cleanse the world. When women stop having periods, humanity will die because there's no way. It's like not having winter. We need winter.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just laughing to myself thinking, walking into your get a massage and you're like, excuse me, are you on your period?
Yes.
Or you walk into a restaurant and
Yes.
you get asked the waitress, "Excuse me, are you on your period? What day? If you are, what day is it?
But
Can
you
I have somebody else?"
yeah, I know, but you probably know. And if we were really honoring each other as women, we'd say, look, I'm not going to do it for you today because I honor you too much to want to put my energy onto you.
Mhm.
I mean, I've worked with this for many years now with my women's work. It
Yeah.
but even just 3 women living together, they of course, they might sync, so they all have their period together, but the beautiful thing is like, "Oh, you're on your period, I'll look after you. Now I'm on now you look." It would be such a different world.
Why do women sink? I lived in a sorority house in college. We all had our periods at the same time.
I
I mean,
know.
you'd look in the trash can, it'd be like full of tampon applicators.
That's right.
Why? Why? How's
It's the
that
kid
work?
that see, that's women's healing. We
Yeah.
sync. We that's why I'm saying when women are together and we don't try and fix, we listen. I mean, you understand that. Like, sometimes if I need someone to listen, I don't want them to tell me what to do. I just their healing comes by listening to me.
Mhm.
And when we say, "Wow, when we have that right frequency again, we don't say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't be doing that." We say we mirror, reflect. When someone reflects back to us what we're feeling, that is healing.
Mhm.
That's why women sink so much, because it's that ability to reflect is so much part of our way of healing.
That just blew my mind, and every woman knows that if you're living with a bunch of other women,
Yeah.
like in an apartment or a dorm
Yes.
room or whatever. I never understood why. I think it's fascinating, though. It's like a bunch of metronomes
It is.
all
And
getting
one
into
but
sync.
imagine you saying, "Wow, we are cleansing ourselves and the earth and our families." If it was all seen as, not that we're unclean, but we are cleansing you
Mm,
through this action. I mean, what a powerful thing.
yeah, exactly. Couple more questions as we're winding down. In your opinion, what are the primary tenets to spiritual enlightenment?
I think that we are enlightening all the time. And so it's not, I always say, I don't think there's an end point to this. It's like an end point to being perfect or healed. To me, what we're doing is becoming enlightened. The lights are coming on and this is again my three-prong question, my 3 prongs. I do something like maybe having a communication with you. I reflect on what's happening and I gain wisdom from that reflection. Wow, that was a lovely time being with Julie. And that's my wisdom, the light of wisdom. And I take that light of wisdom and I bring that into my light body, into my soul. And that to me is the enlightening process. So what I see missing often, Julie, in people's experiences, I ask them, so what did you get out of that? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about? And they go, oh, I don't know. I just moved on. So I don't think there's any experience that we have where we are not learning or growing or becoming enlightened. That's why I say, I think light, it's a constant. But without asking that question, that that question, what did I learn? How did I grow? What am I going to do differently? It's not just a mental process. It's how was my soul enriched by this experience? How was I nurtured by it? Did I grow? And when we stop growing, we should move to another situation. That makes sense. If you're not growing in your work or your relationship, then it's probably not going to be good for your soul anymore.
Last question, why do we incarnate?
I want to say that we made this great choice to do this. And I believe the 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional realm is a unique place that is not present in many other parts of the galaxy. And I believe that we and other light beings have chosen to come here because of the very thing I'm just sharing is this creative process is not available to other places. It's not just about me, putting something out there. This holographic reality that we live in has this reflective quality that allows me to become enlightened. And I see, let me just, a very, very quick answer. I have an ability to talk to plants and trees and rocks and all of those things. And I was in a beautiful art garden that was made up of irises recently. And I saw this one iris and they were amongst other irises. And I go, wow, you're beautiful. And the iris said, yeah, that's what I came here to do. It said, I came here to be an iris, to be this very specific blue iris amongst other blue irises. And when I've done what I need to do, I'll go again. And that's it. And I thought, we make it so difficult. We're fearful of death and why am I here? Just be yourself. When you're done being yourself, leave. And I learned that so much from different animals. The dolphins say the same. Why do humans make it so damn difficult?
Yeah.
So it's like coming into a playground, create what you want to create, maybe more than one thing, obviously, but create, see the reflection of it, take that wisdom back, move on to something else. That's what they want us to do. That's incarnation. And when you stop doing where this playground doesn't work for you anymore, leave.
Beautifully said. Wow, you are extraordinary, my girl. Goodness, you are brilliant, obviously. Obviously, just super spiritual. I'm impressed with how you've combined. I'm all about combining the spirituality and the practicality. You are, like a role model on that in so many different ways. And I love how you intertwine all the feminine and the women's wisdom and the women healing stuff into all the work that you do. And I also love how you've progressed from the wisdom in through the traditional areas, blended the two or the 15, whatever. And now you're espousing uh, the Christine cocktail of all of it mixed together. So kudos to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you for enlightening us in all of these different healing modalities that are available to everyone.
They are. And can I just say, when we went away from the vibration, color healing was the way until pharmaceuticals came in and said, hey, we're not making any money off color. Everybody knows what colors work for them. And the more people can just say, I fancy wrapping it. I used to use a lot of scarves in my workshops. Oh, I'm going to put a scarf around this to make me feel better. Oh, imagine it. Children are so good at imagining color. Or turn a piece of music on. You go, oh, I just feel sad. Let's turn this music on. Oh, I found, don't get caught. What I'm saying is you don't need to go someone else to find out about color and sound. You already know what works for you. You already know your favorite tree. You already know that plant is good for you. You already know that hill is a nice hill. Use the intuition to go to what resonates with your soul and it will bring you healing.
Beautiful. All righty. If people want to know more about you and your work, how can they find you?
Easy, christinepage.com.
All right. And we'll have all of that in the show notes.
Thank you very much.
We have given you a lot to think about. Christine has dropped about a bazillion golden nuggets here in this conversation. So you're going to want to watch this again and take notes because I think it's that profound, some of the things that you've said. So thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us. In the meantime, everybody, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from New Mexico, too, where Christine is. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Julie, so much. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.